They once dazzled audiences and lit up the silver screen. Gifted, beloved, and living the dream. At their peak, they were symbols of glamour, talent, and success. But Hollywood's spotlight doesn't shine forever. As time wore on and the fame slipped away, many of these stars were cast aside. Forgotten by fans, ignored by studios, and left to battle hardship alone, some spent their final years in poverty. These are the heartbreaking final chapters of Golden Age icons. Once celebrated, then quietly discarded by the very industry they helped define. 1. Bud Abbott. Bud Abbott, one half of the legendary comedy duo Abbott and Costello, faced a tragic decline in his later years, brought on by financial missteps, personal loss, and failing health. His troubles began with a prolonged and costly battle with the IRS. The government disallowed over $500,000 in tax deductions the duo had claimed as bond-raising expenses, placing Abbott under immense financial strain. Already accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, he found himself increasingly unable to maintain it. The loss of his partner, Lou Costello, in 1959 marked a devastating turning point. Without Costello, Abbott struggled to find his footing. Their chemistry had been the cornerstone of their act, and attempts to continue solo met with limited success. Meanwhile, his health was worsening. Abbott had long suffered from epilepsy, and the stress of financial and personal collapse only deepened his decline. As opportunities dried up, so did his finances. His unresolved tax debt continued to grow, and eventually, the IRS seized his home. Reduced to living in a modest apartment, the former comedy star who had once been one of Hollywood's highest-paid performers now faced poverty. In a desperate move, Abbott took to television to appeal directly to fans for financial help, a heartbreaking gesture that drew both sympathy and disbelief from the public. Despite the outpouring of support, it wasn't enough. The fortune he had amassed during the height of his fame was gone, replaced by mounting debts and diminishing hope. On April 24, 1974, Bud Abbott died at the age of 78. He passed away nearly penniless, his remaining assets unable to cover his obligations. Once a giant in the entertainment world, Abbott faded into obscurity, a sobering reminder of how fleeting fame and fortune can be in Hollywood. 2. Mabel Normand. He was once the queen of early Hollywood, a gifted comedian, actress, and director whose charm lit up the silent screen. But by the 1920s, her luminous career was eclipsed by scandal and illness. In 1922, she became inadvertently entangled in one of Hollywood's most notorious mysteries, the unsolved murder of director William Desmond Taylor, a close friend. Though never named a suspect, her monogrammed handkerchief was found at the crime scene, and the press quickly seized the story. The media frenzy painted Mabel as a figure caught in Hollywood's dark underworld, linking her name to whispered rumors of drugs, alcohol, and moral decline. Though none of it was proven, the damage to her reputation was swift and brutal. Studios began distancing themselves, and the offers that once came in abundance began to vanish. The Taylor scandal wasn't her first brush with controversy. Mabel had endured volatile relationships and publicized missteps before. But this was different. The relentless coverage overshadowed her talent and contributions, turning a pioneering woman in film into a tabloid curiosity. Once the highest-paid actress in the business, she now found herself struggling to stay relevant in an industry that offered little forgiveness. Compounding her professional struggles was a far more personal battle: tuberculosis. At a time when the disease was both feared and poorly understood, it gradually stole her strength and vitality. Medical treatments were primitive, expensive, and largely ineffective. As her health deteriorated, so did her ability to work, leading to mounting financial difficulties. Mabel made a few attempts to return to film in the late 1920s, but her body could no longer keep up with the rigors of production. She retreated from public life, her once vibrant presence fading into seclusion. On February 23, 1930, she died at the age of just 37 in a sanitarium, far from the fame and glamour that had once defined her world. Her wealth had all but vanished, and Hollywood had long since moved on. But those who knew her remembered her spirit, a woman of talent, resilience, and heart, brought down not by failure, but by the weight of scandal and the cruelty of fate. 3. Josephine Baker, Hirisu. Josephine Baker dazzled the world with her electric stage presence, becoming a Parisian icon in the 1920s and one of the highest-paid performers in Europe. But behind the glamour was a woman who gave everything she had, sometimes too much. She adopted 12 children from different countries, calling them her Rainbow Tribe. and poured her fortune into raising them in a lavish French chateau. Between soaring maintenance costs, declining post-war bookings, and her tireless activism, her finances unraveled. In 1968, she was forced into bankruptcy and lost the home she cherished. Yet even then, she remained defiant. With the help of friends like Princess Grace of Monaco, Baker made one final comeback in 1975 with a sold-out Paris show. The reviews were glowing, but just days later, she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died. Despite her legendary status, Josephine Baker's final years were defined not by wealth, but by debt, and a legacy of fearless generosity. 4. Errol Flynn. He dazzled audiences as Hollywood's ultimate swashbuckler, leaping across screens in Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. At his peak, he was one of the highest-paid stars in the world. But behind the charming rogue persona was a life unraveling fast. Lavish spending on yachts, villas, and endless parties quickly drained his fortune. A highly publicized 1943 trial, though ending in acquittal, left him with staggering legal bills and a tarnished image. His battles with alcohol, tobacco, and drugs only made things worse. Flynn's health declined alongside his bank account, with failed film ventures and costly divorces pushing him deeper into debt. In a final bid to stay afloat, he traveled to Vancouver to lease out his beloved yacht. But the deal never came. At just 50, Flynn died of a heart attack, broke, worn down, and far from the heroic figure he once played. His fall from grace is a stark reminder of how fast fame can fade when life off-screen spins out of control. 5. Mae Murray. They called her the girl with the bee-stung lips. Mae Murray, one of the brightest stars of the silent era. With her striking looks, elaborate gowns, and iconic pout, she defined 1920s glamour. Born Marie Adrienne Koenig in 1885, she rose from vaudeville stages to the heights of Hollywood stardom. By the early 1920s, she was earning a staggering $10,000 a week, roughly $150,000 today, and starring in hits like The Merry Widow. But wealth and fame proved fleeting. Her fourth marriage, to Prince David Midavani, proved disastrous. He persuaded her to leave MGM at the peak of her career, and their lavish lifestyle soon consumed her fortune. When talkies replaced silent films, Mae found herself without studio support or meaningful roles. After their divorce, she realized much of her money was gone. Attempts to revive her career through theater and vaudeville failed. By the 1940s, her finances were in shambles. Her mental health also declined. She reportedly began believing she was still a star. In 1964, security guards found her wandering the grounds of 20th Century Fox, insisting she was expected on set. Few recognized the aging woman as a former icon. She spent her final years at the motion picture country home, passing away in 1965 at age 80. Once adored by millions, she died nearly forgotten. Mae once said, "Once you become a star, you're always a star." But her tragic fall reminds us how fragile fame can be, especially before Hollywood offered any real safety net. 6. Cliff Edwards. Once beloved as Ukulele Ike, met a heartbreaking end far from the spotlight he once commanded. In the 1920s, he was a national sensation. His cheerful voice and ukulele charm made Singin' in the Rain a hit long before it became a film classic. Hollywood soon followed, and Edwards made history as the voice of Jiminy Cricket in Disney's Pinocchio, singing the now iconic When You Wish Upon a Star. But behind the success was a life plagued by instability. Lavish spending, gambling, and 3 failed marriages drained his wealth. The Great Depression slashed his earnings, but his habits didn't change. Repeated bankruptcies followed, and he spent his later years scrambling for small roles and voiceover work. Disney quietly helped cover some of his medical bills, but when Edwards died in 1971, he was penniless and unclaimed. His body was nearly donated for medical research until Disney staff intervened and arranged a proper burial. A man who once lit up radios and theaters across America faded into obscurity, his legacy remembered by a song and a cricket's voice. 7. Clara Bow. You've probably heard the phrase, "it girl," but few know it was coined for Clara Bow. With her breakout role in the 1927 film It, she became Hollywood's first major sex symbol, a magnetic force who defined the flapper era. Born in Brooklyn in 1905, Clara endured a traumatic childhood marked by poverty and a troubled mother. These early wounds followed her into stardom. When she hit the screen in the early 1920s, her natural, expressive energy set her apart. Audiences adored her. She received over 45,000 fan letters a month and earned what would now be millions. But fame came at a steep cost. As Hollywood transitioned to sound, Clara faced brutal press coverage, not due to her voice, but her accent and personal life. Tabloids sensationalized her every move. By 1931, at just 26, she suffered a breakdown and soon retired from acting. Diagnosed later with what we now recognize as severe mental illness, Clara spent much of her life in isolation, haunted by anxiety and insomnia. Though she avoided poverty, thanks in part to her husband, Rex Bell, her final decades were marked by emotional hardship. She died in 1965 at age 60, largely forgotten. Clara once said, "Being a symbol is a heavy burden to carry." Her story remains a sobering look at the toll of fame long before mental health was part of the conversation. 8. George Raft. George Raft was once one of Hollywood's most bankable tough guys, known for his suave presence in gangster classics like Scarface and Some Like It Hot. At his peak, he reportedly earned $18,000 a week, a fortune for the time. But behind the slick image was a man undone by poor choices and relentless gambling. Raft lost massive sums at racetracks, card tables, and casinos, and his financial recklessness steadily drained his wealth. Career-wise, he famously turned down roles in Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon, parts that helped make Humphrey Bogart a legend. Those missteps, combined with mounting debts, pushed Raft into bankruptcy by 1966. Desperate to stay afloat, he took on promotional appearances and minor roles, mostly overseas, but never recaptured his old stardom. When he died in 1980, the once glamorous leading man left behind little more than a $10,000 insurance policy and some furniture. His story is a cautionary tale of how fame and fortune can vanish just as quickly as they arrive, especially when chance becomes a habit. 9. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard's final years were marked by financial hardship, a tragic fall from grace for the woman who helped launch the Supremes into stardom. As a founding member, Ballard's powerful vocals were key to early hits like Where Did Our Love Go? And Baby Love. At their peak in the 1960s, the Supremes rivaled the Beatles in fame and fortune. But behind the scenes, tensions grew. Struggles with depression, alcohol, and internal conflicts led to her departure from the group in 1967. A solo deal with ABC Records followed, but failed to take off. With little income, unpaid taxes, and few royalties from her past success, Ballard's financial situation worsened. Her home was foreclosed in the early 1970s, and she relied on welfare to support her 3 children. Despite efforts to rebuild her life and return to music, her health declined rapidly. In 1976, she died at just 32, broke and largely forgotten by the industry she helped shape. Florence Ballard's story remains one of Motown's most heartbreaking losses. 10. Butterfly McQueen. I don't know nothing about birthin' babies. That single line from Gone with the Wind made Butterfly McQueen unforgettable. Yet despite appearing in the highest-grossing film of all time, adjusted for inflation, McQueen lived most of her life in financial hardship and died tragically in a home accident at age 84. Born Thelma McQueen in 1911 in Tampa, Florida, she earned the nickname Butterfly after performing the Butterfly Ballet in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Her breakthrough came at age 28 as Prissy in Gone with the Wind. While the role brought fame, it also trapped her in demeaning, stereotypical maid roles. But McQueen wasn't just a performer. She was fiercely intelligent and deeply principled. She refused to accept roles that reinforced racist tropes, once saying, "I didn't mind being funny, but I didn't like being stupid." This decision effectively ended her Hollywood career. Rather than compromise her dignity, she chose to walk away. An incredibly bold move at a time when meaningful roles for Black actresses were almost non-existent. To make ends meet, McQueen worked jobs far from the spotlight. Department store clerk, waitress, taxi dispatcher, even a domestic worker, the very role she had refused to play on screen. Despite never receiving royalties from the film that made her famous, she remained gracious. "Now I'm happy I did Gone with the Wind," she said in 1975. "It wasn't when I was 28, but it's paying off now. I wouldn't be getting all these interviews if I hadn't been in it." In 1979, at age 68, she earned a political science degree from City College of New York, finally fulfilling a long-delayed dream. McQueen was also known for her independent spirit. A lifelong atheist, she once remarked, "As my ancestors are free from slavery, I am free from the slavery of religion." That defiant strength defined her life, a woman who refused to be anyone but herself, no matter the price. 11. Ed Wood. Ed Wood's final years were marked by poverty and disappointment, a stark contrast to the creative ambition that once fueled his work. Best known for cult classics like Plan 9 from Outer Space and Glenn or Glenda, Wood made a modest living in the 1950s and 60s, writing pulp novels and low-budget screenplays. Though he earned around $700 to $1,000 per book, the money vanished quickly, often into alcohol. As his reputation faded, so did opportunities. Frequent evictions forced him and his wife to move from one dilapidated apartment to another. By the late 1970s, his connections in Hollywood had dried up completely. Friends recall him bitterly saying he should have been a millionaire, yet he couldn't even pay rent. In 1978, they were evicted once more. Days later, living in a friend's borrowed apartment, Ed Wood died of a heart attack. Broke, forgotten, and far from the Hollywood dream. To some, he was a visionary. To others, a punchline. But either way, his story ended in quiet tragedy. 12. Peter Lorre. With his haunting eyes, distinctive voice, and eerie charisma, Peter Lorre carved out a unique space in Hollywood history. From his chilling breakout in M to unforgettable roles in The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, and The Man Who Knew Too Much, Lorre brought complexity to every performance. Born Laszlo Lowenstein in 1904 in Austria-Hungary, he began acting in Vienna and Berlin before fleeing the Nazis due to his Jewish heritage. Hollywood offered safety, but not always opportunity. He was often typecast as villains or foreign oddballs, a niche he elevated with brilliance but one that limited his growth. Behind the scenes, Lorre was in constant pain. A botched appendix surgery in the 1920s left him with chronic discomfort. Doctors prescribed medications that would lead to long-term dependence, and despite attempts to manage it, his health deteriorated. By the 1950s, his once thin frame had grown heavy, quality roles dried up, and he took whatever work he could find, often in low-budget horror comedies that barely hinted at his talent. Financial stress compounded his health struggles. Medical bills and years of limited opportunities left him with modest means. His final appearance came in the Jerry Lewis comedy The Patsy. When Lorre died of a stroke in 1964 at just 59, his estate was valued at under $50,000. Shockingly low for someone who had appeared in over 100 films. "I am now half crazy, half genius, and completely confused," he once said. That honesty speaks to a man aware of his decline yet unable to stop it. His story is both a tribute to his legacy and a reminder of how poorly Hollywood once supported even its brightest talents. 13. Sammy Davis Jr. He was one of the most dazzling performers of the 20th century, an entertainer who could sing, dance, act, and command a stage like few others. As a core member of the Rat Pack and a pioneering black entertainer in a racially divided industry, he broke barriers and collected accolades. But behind the glitz and fame, Davis was quietly sinking under the weight of overwhelming debt. When he passed away on May 16, 1990, at age 64, his estate owed millions to the IRS, leaving his family with little more than memories of his brilliance. Davis lived big. He had a passion for luxury. Sprawling homes, flashy cars, tailored suits, and a glittering collection of jewelry. His lifestyle matched his image, flamboyant, bold, unapologetically showbiz. But the money that fueled it all didn't last. He was a frequent high-stakes gambler, often losing enormous sums in Las Vegas casinos. And while his career brought in millions over the decades, the spending outpaced the earnings. The heart of Davis's financial collapse, however, wasn't gambling. It was taxes. For years, he relied on financial advisors who mismanaged his income and failed to properly handle his tax obligations. Davis later admitted he didn't fully grasp how the system worked, trusting others to manage the details. That trust came at a steep cost. As penalties and interest piled on, his tax debt spiraled out of control. By the late 1980s, he owed the IRS over $7 million. To make matters worse, the IRS wasn't the only entity he owed. Davis had accumulated additional debts and loans, forcing him to sell off much of what he had built. Homes, vehicles, memorabilia, and personal possessions were liquidated in an attempt to settle the growing mountain of bills. Even after years of sacrifice, his estate was still $5.2 million in debt when he died. In 1989, Davis was diagnosed with throat cancer, a devastating blow to a man whose voice had made him famous. Yet he continued to perform almost until the very end. touring nightclubs, recording, and appearing wherever he could. It wasn't just about income. Performing was who he was. Friends and colleagues described him as tireless, even in pain, refusing to give up the stage. He tried negotiating payment plans with the IRS, but his health was declining too fast for any real recovery. As the bills mounted, Davis was fighting two battles, one against a deadly illness and another against the crushing financial reality of his final years. Sammy Davis Jr.'s legacy is larger than his debts. He was a trailblazer, an icon, and a once-in-a-generation talent. But his story also serves as a cautionary tale about fame, fortune, and the fragile nature of financial security, even for those at the top. Behind the spotlight was a man who gave everything to entertain the world, but who left it with far less than he deserved. 14. Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost was one of the shining stars of silent-era Hollywood. Known for her radiant beauty, comic timing, and expressive screen presence, she headlined popular films like The Marriage Circle, 1924, and Kiss Me Again, 1925. At her peak, she was a top-billed actress, adored by fans and courted by major studios. But as the film industry shifted to sound, Prevost's career began to unravel. Unlike some of her peers, Prevost struggled with the arrival of talkies. Whether due to vocal quality or studio politics, she was passed over for speaking roles, and offers quickly dried up. At the same time, younger talent flooded Hollywood, and studios were eager to chase the next big thing. The same system that once celebrated her charm now left her behind without a second glance. As roles disappeared, so did the stability in Prevost's life. Once accustomed to fame and fortune, she found herself increasingly isolated, facing emotional hardship and financial decline. The toll of professional rejection led to personal struggles, and her health suffered as a result. With no steady income and limited support, she slipped into obscurity, just a decade after being one of the industry's most sought-after stars. By the mid-1930s, Prevost was living in near poverty, reportedly unable to afford basic necessities. Her final years were marked by hardship few could have predicted during her glamorous heyday. On January 21, 1937, she was found in her modest Los Angeles apartment. She was only 38. Reports indicated that health complications related to alcohol and malnutrition contributed to her passing. At the time of her death, she is said to have had just $300 to her name. Marie Prevost's story is one of Hollywood's most haunting tragedies, a cautionary tale of how quickly the spotlight can vanish and how unforgiving the industry could be once it moved on. Her legacy serves as a somber reminder of the silent stars who gave everything to the screen, only to be forgotten when the camera stopped rolling. If you enjoyed this glimpse into Hollywood's golden age, don't forget to like, subscribe, and step into the next story. There's always more behind the curtain.